Welcome back to Full and Thriving, the podcast where we dive deep into what it means to live boldly and reclaim your life through mental healing and personal development. I'm your host, Meg McCabe, a certified eating disorder recovery coach, community founder, retreat host, and speaker. Hi, Chelsea. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Hi, Meg. How
Hi.
are you?
Oh, I'm doing so well. It is super bright and sunny over here where I am today. So I'm like, and I
Beautiful.
have 3 big windows in this room. So I'm like, oh, yay. What a nice way to start my morning. This is the first interview I've had since maternity leave. So you got me fresh and ready to go.
I'm honored. It feels like a warm and cozy moment here. I have my pup Rocky with me, a warm blanket, some coffee with cinnamon in it. And I'm really happy to be talking with you
Oh,
today.
I love that. Thank you for setting the scene for us. I have some coffee too, and I wish I put some cinnamon in mine because that sounds extra cozy for the winter.
Highly recommend.
Okay, so today we have decided to talk about pleasure and specifically the 7 domains of pleasure. And I'm really excited to talk to you about this today because we have not touched on the topic of pleasure on this show. And we've had over 180 episodes. So this is going to be exciting. As far as
Yeah.
pleasure goes, what are the 7 domains of pleasure and what's their significance?
Yeah. It's really exciting to talk about this topic of pleasure. I think there's many different avenues that folks don't know about. So I'd love to share more and have people learn. So there are 7 domains of pleasure, and they are physical, mental, emotional, sensory, creative, social, and spiritual. So when we think of pleasure, we may think of sort of touch or sexuality for some, and for others it might be more specific to a particular sort of embodiment. And so it's really fun to learn from folks where they do feel like they can connect to these different aspects or pillars of pleasure.
Yeah, it's so interesting because when I think of pleasure, I it's like, first of all, did you ever watch Pinocchio, like Pleasure Island? Like they're
Mhm.
all like really indulging in a lot of pleasurable things, like all these, I don't even remember that story, but that's like the first thing that comes to mind. And then I think of like
Mm.
sexual pleasure. And
Sure.
then because I work in food, I think of food.
Absolutely.
Like
Same. Same.
flavored, and then the travel that comes with food too. I think that's like a big
Mhm.
part of pleasure for me is like exploring flavor and then trying out new places. Like if I go to New York City, finding those restaurants that have the best
Mhm.
ambiance. And that for me is super pleasurable. So
Mhm.
it's interesting to think about how there are 7 domains of pleasure that we can explore. And it's not
Yes.
just what we traditionally think of.
No, I love that you just talked about different aspects of pleasure that you have. Enjoyment, the sort of somatics of the ambiance. So perhaps the lighting or the visual, maybe the smell, the
Mhm.
music. There's so much going on somatically in the body to bring out that pleasure.
Mm.
So you're experiencing multiple pillars of pleasure, or from the
Oh,
domains of pleasure. That's pretty neat.
wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we're talking about pleasure, is somatics, like, underlying all of it?
Yes. Yes. And we can definitely get into that, into sort of embodiment and somatics and how that
Okay,
connects.
okay, amazing.
Yeah.
So, when we talk about the 7 domains, some of the ones that you said kinda stick out to me that I'd love, like, examples about. So, when you say, like, mental pleasure, what is an
Mhm.
example of mental pleasure?
Yeah. So some examples would be what are you interested in? What is makes you curious, or what's stimulating to you?
Mm,
Thinking about the cognitive of thoughts, like maybe reading a story is giving somebody a lot of mental pleasure.
mm,
It can be, bringing you to another place that makes you think about the different senses, but it's all cognitive, you know.
mhm,
So
mhm.
that could be a stimulating place, or it could be, when I think of stimulating, it gets a little more nuanced, but I think I think that those are really great
Yep.
examples
Yep.
of people.
And
Yeah.
then emotional pleasure also
Mhm.
intrigues me.
Yeah. So, like an obvious one, like enjoyment. What brings enjoyment would
Mm,
be an emotional domain of pleasure, thinking about sort of the connection between love felt between a mother and a child,
mm,
the sense of relief after a stressful situation like an exam for a college student, which is pretty poignant at this time of
yes.
year at the just part of finals at the mid December time. Pride after completing a challenging task, maybe, you know, getting a license
Mm,
for a professional placement. Yeah, there's so many excitement and anticipation before a special event.
mm,
So it's that warmth, it's happiness, excitement. I'm thinking about like the different sort of words that connect to the emotional,
mhm,
and
mhm.
those are all sort of connected to that
Okay, okay.
pillar. Yeah.
What about you? Like, when you think of the 7 domains, which ones feel like the most pleasurable to you?
Yeah. I think physical for sure connected with creative. So I love live music. I love going to concerts and hearing music and singing and dancing, maybe holding hands and or tapping on my partner's shoulder to the beat of the drum. And yeah, hearing different types of genres of music feel really pleasurable to me. So I would say like that combination. And I would say that that gets emotional too. Like there's absolutely an enjoyment and attunement that happens
Mhm.
when I'm in that state. Yeah.
Wow, this is such a fun conversation because it's bringing me pleasure thinking about all these pleasurable things.
Oh, I'm so happy. Yeah, it's pretty neat.
And it sounds like many things that bring a person pleasure, they don't just fit in one domain. It can be like an intersection of multiple domains.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah.
okay.
Because we have multiple senses and they're bringing us different types of pleasure at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah. Okay.
It's pretty neat.
Wow. Okay. So, what allows somebody to connect to pleasure?
Yeah. It's a great question and a very important one. So it's about getting somatic, getting into the body and practicing being in the body and learning what feels safe, what feels unsafe, and then allowing enough time to get into that embodiment to practice, having a sense of what's safe or,
Mm,
really truly feel comfortable enough to feel discomfort, to know the difference between pleasure and things that are not pleasurable.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, in order to connect to pleasure, it's really important for someone to kind of check in and see like what level of safety they're experiencing in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll get more specific to that. We have to tune in to our body
Mhm.
and practice sort of this mindfulness and awareness
Mm,
of being embodied.
mm,
We have to sort of know what's in front of us
mm.
to be able to navigate, you know, what is what, like what feels good, what doesn't feel good, if that makes sense. It's
Yeah.
harder as we start to get into sort of the body, and sometimes there aren't words. I mean, there are, but like words don't match the experience, the
Mhm.
experiential. You have to get experiential. You have to sort of don't have to close your eyes, but it's an inside job essentially,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. So, would you say that pleasure is kind of an exploratory process and
Mhm.
would someone go about connecting to pleasure like s- deciding to try something new, and then as they are exploring that pleasurable thing, they are checking in with their body and how that
Mhm.
feels?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Good, good. I wanna make sure I'm on the right page. Good.
Yes,
So,
you are.
and can you explain more that link between safety and pleasure? Because I do find, especially working with people who struggle with mental illness, they don't always allow themselves to feel pleasure, or they don't feel like they deserve pleasure. And I
Yeah.
wonder if they feel unsafe sometimes exploring that.
Hmm. Yeah. It's a great point and sort of, yeah, subject to get into. It comes back to the nervous system, right? And what are those barriers to experiencing pleasure? The barriers could look like trauma,
Mm.
could look like an eating disorder. It could also be stress, lack of sleep. What kind of thwarts our ability to connect to our body? Sometimes in traumatic experiences, our, our body numbs.
Mhm.
We go to numbing states and we aren't able to feel pleasure or pain. And that is sort of a way of coping, perhaps maladaptive, that served somebody in the past and unfortunately isn't anymore. So learning how to sense safety allows sort of the opening of a window or a door to seeking pleasure.
Mm. Okay. That's really interesting because I find that pleasure is something like when you think about pleasure, you do have to be in a state of almost relaxation or
Mhm.
joy. Like you have to have those guards down in a way
Yes.
to experience pleasure.
Yeah. And I would say that for anyone who has experienced trauma, working with, you know, a professionally licensed mental health counselor of sorts can guide and support a client into learning how to feel safe in their nervous system and having an education around hyper and hyperarousal and what it means. What are those signals telling you in your body
Mm.
about how you're feeling so that you can create enough spaciousness to then play and experiment with feeling joy and pleasure.
Mm. So could you
That's an
explain
other.
a little bit about the hyperarousal and what that's like and what that
Yeah.
feels like to someone? I know it's different for everyone probably.
Yeah, and I will say, like, I'm a, registered dietitian, so this would be a little bit out of my scope of
Mhm.
practice professionally, but I co-facilitate a group about pleasure from the lens of food and body. And so my facilitator has deep training around how to help and support someone's nervous system. So just naming that firstly.
Mhm.
But as her co-facilitator, yeah, I'll tell a little bit about this. So, we get into a little bit of what's called polyvagal theory,
Mm.
and we talk about sort of freeze and fight or flight and what to sort of name and see in your nervous system that could feel a little bit kind of name what I would say is naming when you're feeling anxious, naming when you're feeling depressed or sad, and naming the physical sensations in the body that are happening connected to those feelings
Mhm. Mhm.
and allowing more space to sit for a little bit of time feeling uncomfortable. And the longer that we're able to do that, the, the better we are at able to then feel more space to feel pleasure and joy.
Mm. So creating that spaciousness, as you said, is really being able to sit with some of that discomfort primarily
Mhm.
first, and then
Mhm.
that kind of passes, kind of like you work through that. Would you say?
Yeah, and I wanna name I think anybody can sit and sort of tune in and breathe with their body.
Mhm.
Feeling uncomfortable while it's unpleasant will pass. Every emotion sort of is in movement and not static and sticking with you.
Mhm.
So I really do invite all to try that. And just sort of disclaimer, if there is any sort of mental health history, working with someone professionally on this practice would be a safe sort of harm reductive way to
Mhm.
manage and get to the other side of
Yes,
things.
I truly
Yeah.
appreciate
Thank
you
you.
sharing that, and I know that this is
Yeah.
a little out of scope, but at the
Yeah.
same time, like, I do also want to explore pleasure with food and body and how all of this relates
Yeah.
too.
Totally.
So, how is pleasure connected to embodiment?
Yeah. So pleasure is connected to embodiment because it involves actively experiencing sensations and feelings within the actual body. You're fully in the moment rather than just mentally sort of checking and leaving,
Mhm.
essentially. And it means being fully in awareness and connected to those physical sensations and experiences of pleasure. You're learning through experience. This experiential moment is extended, and then you can achieve through sort of mindfulness and deep body awareness the different domains of pleasure
Mm.
while going in and out of your interests and living your life and trying them on.
Mhm. Mhm. So if someone's struggling with, say, body image or body acceptance, how does that
Yeah.
impact their ability to feel pleasure?
Yeah. Well, I think that could look many different ways for somebody's coping. I tend to think maybe it's more cognitive than embodied. So I invite people to get out of the mind and into the body and allow space. It might be through first entering cognition and challenging it, and for some,
Mm.
and for others, it might be sort of a bottom up from the body to the mind space. And that's sort of the somatic way,
Mhm.
which is sort of some of these practices of polyvagal theory. And so someone was feeling challenged about their body image, we'd want to move away from rumination in the mind and connect to where there is safety in the body, maybe practicing some breath work, tuning into the senses, maybe finding a candle, something soft to hold, something that really gets you into your sensory details, listening to music, lighting a candle and looking at it, smelling it, and really connecting to, you know, other parts of your nervous system that could feel pleasure. It it sounds sort of really out there away from, well, if I don't like the way I look, what does that have to do with anything? But you're moving away from discomfort
Mm.
and you're moving into feeling your feelings that might have some discomfort but eventually pass to allow for more spaciousness to connect in a safe way to your body. And so I think it's sort of a two-way street of connecting to both mind and body in different capacities to challenge a mindset,
Mhm.
because body image is so much about really the lens of how we see ourselves. And that can be impacted by hormones, internalized sort of diet culture, patriarchy. And so yeah, there's multiple steps to that.
Mm.
I'm wondering if that makes sense out of my head.
Yeah, I really like how you articulated that in those ways. It's like, first, we want to acknowledge that a lot of the body image stuff is in the mind.
Yeah.
So we are essentially, when we're working towards pleasure and trying to reach embodiment, there's like a path of maybe challenging what's going on in the mind or trying to redirect towards the present.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then tuning into the sensations around and trying to actually take initiative yourself, from what it sounds like, to engage those senses.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. And coming back to, it's an inside job. It's not in our mind where there's sort of monkey mind. Sometimes that's used in meditation spaces. It's, the present time is in the body today, and in the mind, we might be reflecting in the past or the future, and sort of the internalized thoughts or feelings. And so we want to get into the present moment, into the body, and sit with it for whatever comes up
Mm.
as much as we can.
Yes. It's interesting because I work with people who have eating disorders who really struggle to sit with their body. Like, that feels
Yeah.
like, in order to unlock pleasure, a really hard thing to do.
Yeah. I think, you know, practicing for as small as 30 seconds to 3 minutes can make a huge difference in how we feel over time. The more we build that sort of muscle flex
Mhm.
of sitting with discomfort, we can create more space to allow for exploration to find out what actually does give us pleasure.
Mhm.
Uh, we have to know what we don't like first.
Mhm.
And then we get to honor that and go, oh, okay, that doesn't feel good. So I won't do more of that.
Mhm.
But also acknowledging the difference between a little discomfort to, oh, like, I don't prefer this. The difference between pain and preference.
Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. For some people, like particularly maybe in with neurodivergence, there could be too much sensory detail, too much light, too much sound to really be able to be present. So, what do you need to connect to yourself to be present? Do you need the volume to be lower? Do you need the lights to be dimmed or brighter? What feels best for you? Having your feet on the ground, feeling the ground beneath you. What what feels best? Some people like a weighted blanket on their sort of thighs to help feel grounded. It is so individual. But then once they have that sort of set point of stability
Mhm.
with their senses, they then have room to go explore maybe the smell of a really good scented candle. But if the lights were really bright and the music was really loud, maybe they couldn't enjoy the smell of the candle.
Right. I actually completely relate to this because I've always been
Yeah.
kind of someone who needs my environment a certain way. Like, I don't like the
Yeah.
lights super bright. I don't want things overly loud, or maybe I want like some soft music in the background, or
Mhm.
I always want to be in my comfy clothes. And I guess I'm in a way trying to create an environment where I feel stable enough to fully enjoy that moment.
Mhm. When I talk to folks about body image, and this is sort of related,
Yeah.
I promise, and they find it hard to connect with other people while they're going out to eat because they feel uncomfortable in their clothing. We talk about finding clothing that feels good to wear so they can be really present and functional to connect to people
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to like this is the outfit I wanted to wear, but then I can't actually be connected because when I sit down, maybe my pants are too tight and I can't think about anything my friend is saying next to me, and I don't feel good and I don't want to eat this food because it feels uncomfortable. If I wear a pair of pants that fit me, I can be present. I can talk to the person next to me. I can eat the food in front of me.
Mm.
For some people, there may be other barriers, but in regards to sort of what's comfortable, what's pleasurable. And pleasure doesn't have to be at the height of things. It could be like a neutral pleasure,
Mhm.
right? Like it's not just it's not uncomfortable.
Right, like, it's, like, preferred, like you said, like, you feel good.
Preference.
I
Yeah.
really like where you're going with this in the sense that it's a helpful reminder that we need to give ourselves permission to make ourselves comfortable and let ourselves reach for those things that make us feel good in our bodies, more
Mhm,
relaxed, more stable.
mhm. Right. Right. I come back to like what's the purpose of what we're trying to do?
Mhm.
I think it's to be connected to other people, connected to ourselves. If we
Mm.
can't do that, what do we need to do? What do we need to change in our environment so we can be present and embodied?
Yes, I love the example of the dinner too because I always find clothing can be a tool to for confidence too. Like if you actually honor your body while you're,
Mhm.
finding that outfit for the night. Like I just went
Right.
out to dinner with some friends for the first time after like giving birth. So my body's totally different than it used to be. And I found these pants that used to be too big for me, but now they fit great. And I like they're really cute, and I put them
Awesome.
on, and I had my cute little coat and my, like, sweater and boots, and I
Oh,
felt like I felt so confident walking down the street to the restaurant. Like, I was like, "I have the cutest outfit on," and I felt really present. Like, I felt like I had this confidence, this presence, and I felt really embodied. And I
that's
and I
awesome.
didn't, like, judge myself because the size of the pants were different, or I didn't try to fit into something that maybe I used to could have worn but can't anymore. It was just, like, embracing where I was.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a beautiful moment. Thank you for sharing
Yeah, of
that.
course, super fun. Okay, so as far as this pleasurable exploration goes, could you share a little bit more about your personal journey with
Yeah.
these themes of safety, pleasure, and embodiment?
Mhm. Yeah. So I would say I've spent maybe 30 years. I'm 41. I spent 30 years of my life on and off diets. And so I would name that as sort of disordered eating. Not, not quite super acute, but enough that you'd call it disordered and chronic. And that really disconnected me from my body and a lot of pleasure. I have a memory of my 30th birthday being on some diet and going to a brunch to celebrate and choosing really limited, restrictive plate,
Mm,
and how like there were a million other dishes that I would have preferred, several other
yes.
dishes that I would have preferred to have had and enjoyed. And I'm sad looking back at a lot of things that I chose to do. Thankfully, I'm okay. I'm in a safe and healthy state and no longer dieting. But thinking about how I, yeah, internalized that as someone in a larger body, that and as a woman, that I needed to do that. I was, in a straight sized body as a teen. And yeah, those messages were passed down, and that occurred, and that being dieting on and off. And I think the more that you are going away from the connections that your body's giving you, the more you're moving away from regulation of sort of like finding pleasure and really connecting to when you're dysregulated or regulated, and just sort of like the traffic light, like when to stop and go. There's no information between the brain and the gut, and we'll get more into that when it comes to sort of the connection to food and body mo- more a little bit later. But yeah, I definitely had that disconnection, and I think in a lot of ways that was really numbing, and I thought it was sort of the thing you do.
Mhm.
And I'm really grateful that I'm no longer engaged in that. So yeah, I'm curious about if there's anything particular that you
Yeah.
wanted to want.
Yeah, of course. So when you share your story, it sounds
Yeah.
like you were kind of um riddled with these like diet culture thoughts and preoccupation with your body and choosing foods that you don't find pleasurable. By the way, I've definitely been there. I remember my 18th birthday, same could have been the same story, just feeling like
Yeah. Yeah.
picked a sad salad, as I like to say, instead. And I was at the Cheesecake Factory, like pick something good.
Oh
And
no.
like but I guess my question for you is like at what point did you start to heal that and like connect to
Yeah.
pleasure?
hmm Yeah. I would say in my 30s, like early to mid 30s, I found intuitive eating.
Mm,
And I stopped dieting pretty quickly. And yeah, I worked with intuitive eating counselor who happens to also be a registered dietitian. And after like 3 sessions, I was sold on not dieting. And I had planned to go back to school because I'm a career changer to go become a registered dietitian. I think initially I had thought, oh, well, I'll like go help people and help sort of manage my body at the same time, kind of thing. And very quickly turned that trajectory to, helping people manage chronic illness in a weight inclusive way, um, not prescribing weight loss. So I'm so grateful for the knowledge that I learned and unlearned,
mhm,
because so much of intuitive eating is unlearning what you've internalized to
mhm.
relearn and connect to embodiment. Yeah, so that was an incredible peak point for me.
Amazing. You know, you mentioned
Yeah.
intuitive eating. One thing that I absolutely love about intuitive eating is I don't know, it's like what are they called? Pillars of intuitive eating or like commandments, who knows? It's like who knows?
Principles.
Principles.
Yeah.
Uh, for me, I love discover the satisfaction factor. That one
Mhm.
is my most pleasurable one, I feel like. That one's connected to pleasure for me. That
Yeah.
changed the game for my relationship with food, and that's why food is so connected to pleasure for me, I think, because when I think about when I was in recovery from my eating disorder, I remember thinking how, like, cheated I felt when I'd order something I didn't want, you
Mm,
know,
totally.
and how I mentally was not satisfied by those choices. And then eventually I realized, oh, like my inner voice quiets down, like that eating disorder voice quiets down when I actually pick something that I want and I feel satisfied by. And that
Yeah.
gives me pleasure. I'm not sitting thinking about food for the rest of the day if I find, meals that I actually genuinely enjoy.
Yeah, and it reminds me, the satisfaction factor reminds me of the inside job of moving away from the external
Mm.
rules
Mhm.
of diet culture to internally going in and tuning in to embodiment to really feel the pleasure.
Yes, exactly. It is an inside job, and that's
Yeah.
kind of what had to learn. You have to learn things kind of the hard way in
Yeah.
recovery, but you get there eventually. So, how would you say, from a dietitian's perspective, pleasure is connected to food and body?
Yeah. So, how is it all connected to sort of food and body? Gets into a couple different things. So, the hypothalamus
Mm.
acts as a key communicator between the gut and the brain, and it sends messages, allowing us to sort of know when we need to urinate and knowing when we're hungry and full. So, it's giving us that information to help regulate bodily functions to maintain homeostasis. And then some of those examples can look like also like a rumbling stomach to respond to eating, feeling a little bit like full to respond to stop eating, noticing if you're sort of have goosebumps when you're cold, um, all interoceptive awareness. It's all information in the body. So everything's an inside job, right? Like knowing how to take care of yourself is an inside job. But yeah, connecting to your hypothalamus, I mean, it just happens automatically. There's nothing you have to do. Although taking care of yourself and eating regularly, consistently, and adequately allows for the function of this brain gut connection. And so when people have that strong interoceptive awareness, they're able to then tend to it and respond to it. And when we can respond to it, we can then recognize our needs and have them met. And then that's when we can have pleasure. So it gets a little more nuanced in what are the rules cognitively that we have about like who deserves pleasure, who
Yeah.
gets to have satisfaction. And so, you know, we all deserve pleasure and satisfaction. But if one has an internalized sense that they don't, that's another sort of unlearning to occur
Mm,
as well.
that's a really challenging one. So, if someone's sitting here saying, like, yeah, this is so nice for other people to experience pleasure, but I don't deserve it, how
Right.
would someone start to unlearn that?
Yeah. I mean, that goes back to the psychology, scope of practice. So, a licensed clinical therapist of some sort with whatever different array of trainings would be supportive of maybe self-efficacy, self-esteem, and sort of rewriting sort of that sense of building the sense of self back up. For some people, that might include pharmacology and taking medication for mental health as well.
Mhm.
It could be part of that. But yeah, those internalized sense of self sort of negative aspects can definitely thwart the ability to feel deserving enough to allow yourself to have pleasure. So practice too.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's a little bit of faking it till you make it. I think telling the body that it's deserving and letting itself feel these things can also bring more self-efficacy. Having a fed brain can allow for then healing in the mind.
That's a really good point. It's a really good
Yeah.
point. Sometimes that starved brain just becomes a really anxious brain
Yes.
and more critical, more judgmental. So like,
Yeah.
hey, check in, make sure you're fed, nourished.
Yeah.
And that could also help decrease those thoughts of being undeserving.
Yes, absolutely.
Amazing. Okay. Very cool. So, we're talking about pleasure, food, body, and all of this. And, there are people here probably feeling a little inspired, like, hey, I want to connect back into pleasure. How can people start like experiencing more pleasure in their
Yeah.
life? Any tips there?
Mhm. Absolutely, and I invite everybody out there to play with it. I think it's there for you all the time when you have capacity. Practicing mind by focusing on your body sensations, creating a relaxing environment, exploring different forms of stimulation, and communicating with others around you about your needs, like setting boundaries around your sensory detail needs. Do you need someone to lower the volume? Do you need the heat turned up? What do you need? Can you ask for it so that your environment feels pleasant? That could increase your pleasure. Being patient, especially when we're healing from chronic illness or anything, managing mental health or trauma, being really compassionate to yourself is so, so important.
Mm.
And actively really like slowing down to savor these experiences. So, first and foremost, sensing that safety so that you have you know, the
Mhm.
space to do this
Mhm.
practice.
Mhm. Those are really good tips, and they all do create that internal sense of safety. Like that that self-compassion will help you feel a little bit more safe. That patience for your
Yes.
body, patience for, if you have chronic illness or trauma, like all of those things allow you to feel safe in if you practice them. And then that's when I love this word, you create that spaciousness, as you called it. I'm going to start using that word more to explore. And I think this whole conversation has just made me realize how, like, almost the foundation of pleasure is really, first of all, being able to, like, make yourself feel comfortable.
Yes.
Like, and I never really saw it that way, but now I'm
Yeah.
seeing it as like, hey, like that it makes sense that I'm like a little weird about lighting in my house because I want to have a pleasurable moment and I've been doing that without consciously realizing that's kind of
Yeah.
how it goes. So I appreciate kind of laying that out there for us, and I just want to remind people listening, like, you you deserve pleasure, right?
Yes.
You deserve pleasure. You please give yourself permission to allow yourself to be comfortable and to
Yeah.
open up space for your own pleasure. And Chelsea, what words of wisdom do you have for the listeners?
I think to never give up and
Mm,
to keep going.
mm,
Yeah. And to stay compassionate with yourself through the
mm,
journey.
mm. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Do you find your people get really discouraged and like want to give up on themselves in this process?
I mean, I think in our culture, we live in a really sort of weight stigmatized, fat phobic. There's a lot of patriarchy and racism in our world. And I want people of all shapes and sizes and colors to know that they deserve pleasure, even when there are messages out in society that have been internalized or otherwise, whether it's from, parental trauma or school or from peers, that your birthright is to come back to yourself and you deserve and are allowed to feel your feelings and feel all of the sort of sensory details that tell you what feels good and what doesn't, and you get to have preference so that you can feel
Mm.
your best and thrive.
Yes. Oh, so good. I am so glad you expanded on that.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, Chelsea, for joining me today. This was a really fun conversation. And I
Yeah.
know,
Thank you so much for having
oh,
me.
you're so welcome. This has been lovely. And I appreciate you so much and everything you do.
Likewise. Thank you.
You're welcome. So there you have it. Another episode of Full and Thriving in the books. I want to personally thank you for joining me in listening to today's show. And if you found value in this conversation, I would be so grateful if you could please take a moment to subscribe to the show and leave a review. Your support not only helps us reach more people who are striving to live their most full and thriving life, but it also allows us to bring on even more incredible guests with valuable insights that can change your life. Every follow, every review makes a huge difference, and together we can continue to grow this beautiful community. Thanks again for being a part of the journey, and we'll see you next time on Full and Thriving.